One of the reasons I love this little Samsung laser printer is the fact that not only does he work as a great local printer, in this case I've got him plugged into the back of my computer, but he also acts as a great networked printer. Now, a network printer is its own host on your network. It's going to have its own IP address, it's going to have its own network card or wireless card, whatever it might be, and it acts as its own host. Now that's really important, because if you set this guy up to be his own host on a network, he has to be able to take commands from Windows systems, he's got to be able to take commands from Linux, from Macs, whatever it might be. So there's a lot of configuration that goes into taking a printer and making it a network host. The most important one is going to be, well, he's going to need an IP address. Now, this particular printer only has wireless. He doesn't have an Ethernet connection. So the first thing we're going to have to do is give this guy some kind of IP address. So with this guy, what we do is we plug in via USB only to get the configuration started. Now once he's up and configured, then we can do things. I believe this guy actually has a web server built in, and just like we were accessing a router or anything else, we would just open up a web page to do all the other configurations. So the important first job is I'm going to have to give him an IP address. So also, I need to configure him as wireless, so I'm going to have to give him the SSID and the password for my wireless network. Get that all up and configured, and then we can start getting into some of the more interesting details. So let's start this process. This guy has this handy little easy wireless setup. So let me go ahead and run this fella. Turn the printer on, wait till the printer's ready, click the next button. Okay. So what it's saying here, it says, do you want to use this USB cable to make this initial setup? Now this is a very low-end laser printer, inexpensive, they work great. But unlike a lot of the higher-end printers, you're going to have to do everything through some type of configuration utility. If you've got a big high-end laser printer, a lot of times they will have like their own little screen, and you can type in their IP address, and you can set up the SSID and all kinds of stuff simply by pressing buttons on the printer. Now this guy isn't that fancy, not that high-end, so we got to use this little tool here. I hear you, printer. Okay, so it sees my wireless network. That's the one I want to connect to. I'm going to hide the characters because I don't want you guys getting into my wireless network. And hopefully I've done this right, so we'll give him a minute and he's going to tell me whether he can connect on that network or not. Ta-da! Okay, so it actually found my wireless network. He's connecting via DHCP. Now that's his IP address. Always make a point to remember the IP address of your printer. Now right now he's set to DHCP, although it's very common to set printers' IP addresses to static simply because they don't change, and that can be convenient. But for right now I'm going to remember it's 192.168.4.30, and I hit next, and it says, what method do you want to use to connect to the printer? And it's asking me USB or wireless. I'm going to go ahead and say wireless right now. And it offers for me to print a test page, which I'm going to skip. So what I've done is I've got an IP address on this printer. Once I've got an IP address, there's almost always some type of web interface. So I'm going to open up a web browser. And we've got a web interface. So this is where I'm going to do the real setup for my wireless network. Now keep in mind, because he has an IP address, it's not that hard for me to set up on a lot of OSs. I can go in and say install a new printer, it's on the network, I type in its IP address, and most OSs are pretty good. But there's a couple other features I want to show you right here. Now this guy requires a login. And yes, I didn't know what the login was and I had to look it up. I read the manual. And it wants me to change my password to something more aggressive. For right now, I'm just going to say no. And this is a fairly common type of interface you're going to see for a network printer. So it's got information which we're looking at here. I can set machine settings. And this is pretty much the same type of stuff we can set in printer properties within Windows. Other OSs have similar features. But network settings is interesting. So first of all, we can give it some kind of host name. I like to give it a name that actually makes sense. And the location, someone's being cute. And the contact name, things like that are not terribly critical. So let's kind of march through here on the left, and I want to show you some fairly cool settings here. First of all, here's our IPv4 settings. So right now it's set up for automatic, but if I wanted to, I could set this up as manually. Now, if I set it as manually, I'm going to have to document this. So right now, 192.168.4.30 is part of my DHCP range. I'm going to leave it at that for now, but this would be something that would be very, very important for me to document down the road. If you're using IPv6, you could actually turn all that on here. We're not using IPv6 in-house, so I'm going to keep that turned off. Now, we're going to kind of jump through some of these other settings just so you're aware of them. First of all, here's Wi-Fi. So right now, Wi-Fi is turned on, and this is my SSID. You can see it's set up as infrastructure and what type of frequencies, all of that type of stuff is right there. If I wanted to, I could do a couple of other interesting things. Number one is Wi-Fi Direct. Wi-Fi Direct is a feature that you'll see on a lot of Wi-Fi devices, which allows you to make most people consider it temporary. It is a 802.11 ad hoc network where I can just have like a laptop and I can create this connection, and it's good for a while. So you don't see Wi-Fi Direct used long term in general, but it's a quick little ad hoc 802.11 network you can use. Okay, starting back up at the top. So all of this raw TCP, LPR, IPP, all of this is for, more than anything else, talking to older school Linux computers. So LPR is a type of way to talk to Linux that it will understand and be able to print to it. Some of these others we're going to save for another episode. But the next one I want to show you is SLP. So SLP stands for Service Location Protocol. It's a little bit old-fashioned. First of all, it's on port 427. I need you to know that for the A+. But SLP is used for a lot of older stuff. In fact, good old Novell NetWare, if you've never heard of it, you're not missing anything. It was a networking OS of your forefathers. Some HP, big HP, what was known as JetDirect, their own little language, would use this service location protocol so that people could find these printers. The only time you're going to know about needing SLP is because you're going to have an administrator say, you need to make these SLP settings. Universal Plug and Play is also very, very popular. Universal Plug and Play, which is really the Simple Service Directory Protocol, SSDP, is another tool which a lot of operating systems, certainly OS X and certainly Windows, use as a way to go out on the network and find stuff. If you're a Windows user and you click on network neighborhood or find computers near me or whatever it is for your version of Windows, and you see it shows you routers and printers and all that stuff, that's actually part of UPnP or SSDP, which is really the same thing. Next one is SNMP. SNMP stands for Simple Network Management Protocol, and SNMP is an incredibly interesting and powerful tool. SNMP is designed to allow you to not only look at all these different devices on your network, and I'm not talking about computers and printers, routers and switches and just about anything. If you turn on SNMP and then you have the right software, you can sit at one computer and talk to these devices and determine stuff about them. For example, we have a big server here that has a heating problem. So we turn SNMP on that particular server, and then we can query that server and determine what its temperature is at any moment. We can use SNMP on one of our main switches to see how much bandwidth is getting used really, really heavily. For printers, we can use SNMP to query things like how much toner do you have, how much paper do you have in your tray. There's all kinds of stuff if you have an SNMP capable printer, and this one is. So there's all these different SNMP protocols, and the older ones aren't as good. You can see this one actually has SNMP version 3, which is pretty cool. The one big difference to know between SNMP V1, V2, and V3 is V1 and V2 are unencrypted. Anybody can intercept this data. V3 is completely encrypted. Again, you're not going to be setting this up unless you have some administrator who's telling you, oh, we're using SNMP, and then they'll give you the name of your community. It's almost kind of like a domain name, and then you type in that name, and then people with the right software can talk to these things. Pretty cool, huh? All right. So once this thing is up and installed properly, now you have to go back to the individual operating systems and actually install these network printers. So what I'm going to do right now is we're going to install this network printer using Windows 10. I have completely uninstalled all of the printer stuff for this particular computer, and it's unplugged. I pulled the USB out, so the only thing I have right now is a known IP address. So what we're going to do now, oh, and he's on the wireless network, so everybody should be able to see him. So let's go through this process. Now I need to warn you, I'm doing this in Windows 10. And Windows 10 and Windows 8 and 8.1 make this a little bit easier. So with that in mind, we're going to actually cheat a little bit. I'll show you what I mean. So let's go ahead and add a printer. And it's going to start searching. Yes, there are a lot of printers around here. So there's the printer that we want right there. So if I wanted to, I could just go ahead and hit next, and because Windows 10, Windows 8, Windows 8.1 is more automated than, say, Windows Vista and 7, life can be a lot easier. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to cancel. Well, not cancel. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click here. The printer that I want isn't listed, so let's click on that. And this is the screen I want you to see. In this case, we are going to go through a process of finding it by IP address. So what we can do here is, if it's a shared printer, this one isn't shared. We're the only computer, right? We're just connected to it from a network. So shared isn't going to count here. But add a printer using a TCP IP address or host name. So let's click on that. And we'll type in its IP address. So if you've got an older version of Windows, you're probably going to have to do it this way. Yay, it found it. All right, so we're going to go ahead and hit next. Now, if we want to share a networked printer, that never made much sense to me, but that is an option there. And we hit finish. Oh, and by the way, you print a test page as well. So if you have a network printer, remember, you're going to have to do some initial configuration. In this particular case, we used a USB cable with a direct connection, and then we went ahead and ran the configuration utility. But on some of the bigger ones, you can actually go on to the printer itself and type in things like IP addresses and SSIDs. Once that's configured, very commonly we have some type of web interface that allows us to go ahead and do all the configuration. Once that's set up, the actual process of installing a network printer isn't that terribly different from installing a local printer. The one big difference is that if you don't have super advanced versions of operating systems, you can always search just by the IP address, and pretty much everybody's going to find it.